Welcome to Writers Not Writing, a show where I interview authors about the ways they procrastinate and highlight artists who are using their voices to push back against fascism. I'm Benjamin Gorman, your friendly author in exile, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug does his best to try to make me sound better. Welcome to Writers Not Writing. Welcome to the ad-free bonus version of the show, just for supporters of the Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. You, yes, you are the best.
If I take my time, I'll make.
Hail and well met readers and reviewers. Welcome to Writers Not Writing. I am very excited about this show. Today's guest is John Wiswell. Him, a disabled author who lives where New York keeps all its trees, way up north. He won the 2020 Nebula Award for Best Short Story for Open House on Haunted Hill and the 2021 Locus Award for Best Novelette, That Story Isn't the Story. His work has also been a finalist for the Hugo, World Fantasy, and British Fantasy Awards. His work has been translated into 11 languages. His debut novel, Someone You Can Build a Nest In, came out in 2024, and I would like to take credit. I believe I was the first person to nominate it for the Nebula. I love this book so much. I used in my review the word masterpiece very carefully. Like, it is a brilliant book. The ending, I will not spoil it for anyone, but the ending is so satisfying. So check out Someone to Build a. When I saw it on store shelves, I'm two books through a paranormal series myself, and I just was like, I must have this. And it's so the cover's beautiful. The cover artist, I mean, they grabbed me. So check out Someone You Can Build a Nest In, and you have another novel coming up very soon, Wearing the Lion. And I got to read an ARC, so we could talk about that one too. So congratulations on that one.
Thank you so much. And it's a delight to be here. I'm really happy to talk with you this morning.
Yes, so let's talk. Well, actually, let's talk about the Someone You Can Build a Nest In, because that one, before this show airs, no, just after the show airs, we're right in between here. We'll find out about the Nebula Award for that one, but already the Hugo, right?
The Hugos are in August.
In August, okay, but it is nominated for a Hugo as well, and
Yes.
I would not be at all surprised if it is a clean sweep. This book is so great. So, how has that? I mean, writing is such an interesting field because some people get competitive about it, and it's really not competitive. We're competing with Netflix. Like, if somebody loves your book and therefore reads my book, if they find we're an incredibly supportive community, or at least we should be. And yet you've achieved this level where now it is getting competitive. Oh, I mean, when you look at those other folks who are nominees, that has got to feel so satisfying in and of itself.
Yes. I to be put on a level with Kelly Link is, I'll say, it feels absurd. Because Kelly Link is an influence on me. I have loved her short fiction for longer than I have been publishing short fiction myself. And I loved the Book of Love. I am a big fan of most of the finalists in most of the categories. I adore that Evgenia Trantafilou is up against herself for multiple awards
Yeah.
across the spectrum this year. I view storytelling as a communal effect. We do this not just to tell stories to others, but to inspire each other to tell our stories. I am not a writer because I am singularly brilliant. I am a writer because I grew up reading, I don't know, Tolkien and Douglas Adams, and then grew into reading Ted Chiang and Kelly Link, and now love reading Evgenia Trantafilou and Adrian Tchaikovsky. I don't write out of a vacuum. So to me, the honor is to be nominated and to be able to celebrate my fellow nominees, and then to help raise other voices up, because every year, especially in the short fiction world, amazing voices from niches you haven't heard of break out. And if you're paying attention, you get enriched. I I'm a big fan of emerging voices like Dominic Dickey, who's a fantastic horror writer. Guan Un is an Australian sci-fi writer. They're writers of short fiction, which I adore. Of course, I wrote it for much longer than I've been publishing it for much longer than I've been publishing novels. Uh, so to be honored by a community like SIFWA, to have my fellow writers say, "We loved your book so much, we would like to put it on a pedestal for a while." It's an amazing honor. It is also an opportunity sometimes to do like what I just did, which is to shout out people who haven't been put on that pedestal yet. I expect golden things for the likes of a Dominic Dickey or Thomas. Well, Thomas Ha actually now has broken out into the award circuit too. Well deserved. He's phenomenal. He just can't stop publishing really good stuff. Uh, but so it is a delight and it is an honor and it is humbling, but it's also invigorating to get to be in conversation with other authors who have inspired me or are just inspiring me now. It's a communal thing. Storytelling has always been a communal thing. That's why we have it as a species.
Well, and that's an excellent segue into Wearing the Lion. So you chose to tell a story that is a Greek myth. And I mean, the Greeks very much recognize storytelling is a communal enterprise, going back to Greek theater. But what brought you to telling the story of Heracles and Hera?
Um, Thank you for asking. Yes, I one of the first stories my parents ever read me were the labors of Heracles, and he seemed like a pretty cool guy. He went to a lot of places, he did a lot of stuff. Sometimes it was messed up stuff. Uh,
Yes.
uh, but I found him so compelling and otherworldly a figure. And then you learn about Greek history and you realize, oh, they viewed him as otherworldly despite intimate as well.
Yeah.
That he was a figure of culture, but also outside of culture. The whole purpose of a demigod, right, is the bridge between the mortal and the divine. Uh, and yet, there were things about his myth and then about other myths that always stick out to you because the beautiful thing about mythological retellings is there are always gaps. What don't we tell when we tell these stories? And one of the gaps in the Heracles story that always stuck out to me was that uh, the Furies come and drive him mad and make him slay his family. And then in his despair, he goes upon the 12 labors to get atonement. And then he, on the labors and ever afterwards, never seems sorry once. He just does cool things. And one assumes that he was supposed to feel bad at some point, but it doesn't really affect anything that he's doing outside of it was his motive to go do cool things, which then becomes his legend. It's not the legend of a grieving father. It is the legend of a dude who was super cool,
Yeah.
which he would not have agreed with.
Right.
That is something Heracles would have disagreed with. A second gap that always perplexed me is that Hera causes the labors and then checks out.
Yeah.
And even if you're like, okay, I guess Hera is not the big bad of the Heracles story, what is she doing for
Yeah.
that time period? What is Hera's life like? What is Hera's existence? Hera often gets shortchanged in the myths.
Yes.
She is often a calcified image of what the rich didn't like about their wives. She is a satirical foil. It's more seldom that someone like Homer breathes a cunning life into her existence. So I wanted to explore her relationship with Heracles and then Heracles' relationship with her from a very different angle. So
Yes.
the premise of Wearing the Lion, if y'all haven't figured out, is a retelling that entwines Hera and Heracles very rigorously. Hera is the goddess of family who orders the Furies go make Heracles kill himself, and then he accidentally kills his family instead, and then comes to and it's like, I have destroyed my life and I have sinned in front of Hera, and I'll never be able to make this up to her. And of course, she's meanwhile up in heaven going like, oh no, oh no, what
Well,
did I
one of
do?
the things I loved about the book is that had to be handled so delicately because on the one hand, I felt this sense that they were deeply grieving. On the other hand, the book is funny, but that's not funny. Like, and that's a
Right.
tricky thing to pull off. Like, this horrible thing has happened, not just to him, she regrets and, is going through her own kind of penitent journey over the course of the book. but there's a lot of humor. But that's not the funny part. And I thought you pulled that off very, very well. That was really tricky.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the truth of the matter is that the absurd and the funny and the profane do not wait for us to finish grieving.
Yeah,
Uh, George Carlin continues to perform no matter what horrible events are in the news until those events are gone, and so is George.
yeah,
So the question then was how to balance life. To me, these things do exist within a balance. The Mel Brooks quote that tragedy is when something bad happens to me. Comedy is when it happens to you.
yeah.
Uh, so what I wanted to explore was these other characters who offer angles on life. Now Hera doesn't realize how funny she is for a
Right.
while because of our mortal angle on her. But Heracles, because he can't bring himself to do violence ever again, he has this impossible strength, but why would he ever use it to do harm? These hands ended the lives of my children. I feel like a monster. Turn around and is told, go slay these monsters, and he can't bring himself to do it. In fact, he winds up communing with them because they are the closest thing in the world to how he feels himself. And so there's this kinship with the supernatural creatures who are outside of society, much as he now feels, but they are quite absurd creatures some of the time. And they have very different experiences of tragedy and violence than he does. And so, to some degree, they offer some kind of comfort in that they are over the top or strange. In other ways, they offer a grounding effect because they understand what he's been through. They're just at different phases in hardship than he is. So there's this communal nature, which is, of course, what we've been talking about the entire interview.
Right.
And on the flip side, then Hera, goddess of family, starts to finally look around at her family and ask, like, is this how have I been using my authority in my divine family?
How do I
And
repair these relationships that I didn't even realize were deeply unhealthy?
yes, because another issue is gods are never asked or seldom asked to grow.
Yeah.
What happens when a god becomes uncomfortable with their station and desires to be something other? And Hera was this beautiful window into that. I loved writing her just as much as I loved writing Heracles.
Well, and one of the things that I found myself wondering as I was reading it is, when we're kids, we're exposed to a very kid-friendly version of these myths. Do you even remember which version your folks read to you? I mean, as a kid, I had what was the beautiful art book that was the large book of oh, I'm trying to remember the author's name.
Hamilton?
And then, college, you get Edith Hamilton,
Yeah.
which again, it kind of glosses over. I mean, characters just disappear frequently because, which is not a knock on Edith Hamilton. She's telling these huge sweeping stories. Did you find yourself like trying to wrangle 100 versions, or did you go, I know enough of this to retell this story, or was there a ton of research involved?
Oh, I did a ton of research. I mean, the versions that my parents read to me when I was little were just the copies that were in the library. So they could be kind of brutal. I remember my dad kind of like not liking reading these stories to me because they were a little too grim for him. Um, but I don't know. I think that was ultimately beneficial for me. I would rather children be introduced to reality bit by bit rather than everything having the edges softened off of them the entire time and then hitting the horrible shock
Yeah.
when reality arrives. My first day of college was 9/11.
Oh,
Uh, it was a really horrible awakening for a lot of people. And different folks in our class had different levels of exposure to trauma, and we had to help each other and counsel each other. But anyway, that is merely an anecdote about how one is introduced to heavy matters. And mythology, classic mythology, can be that. Uh, Also, the versions that tend to be read to me were of the simple Edith Hamilton variety, where there are tons of gaps, which I think are great for kids because they invite imagination. What is supposed to go between these gaps or go into these gaps? And I think those are actually great for kids. But yes, I have been reading classics my entire life. I like Euripides. I have a very soft spot for Sophocles. Aristophanes is the weird one. And So I had done a lot of reading, but I did additional reading for this to try to look at how different regions of Greece over the ages uh, handled the characters and what got written and what got written out and what got changed. It's very funny that like Euripides' version is the family dies after he's done with the labors. You're like, what was he doing the labors for then,
Right.
man? Oh, this is fascinating that it's so different. And sometimes the inconsistencies between versions give you an artistic license. For instance, there's one trope I'm not particularly fond of. It's called fridging, where you kill off a character's significant other or family for pathos, which is the foundation of the Heracles myth, but it's particularly usually a male character's wife is fridged. When you realize that, like in half of the classics, his wife is not killed, you're like, oh, this is an opportunity to do so much more with grief and bonding and support and coming and drifting apart. There's so much more emotional reality if there are two parents reflecting on what's happened. Uh,
And
that
the way you
I love the inconsistencies.
Yes, and I thought the way that you handled her was so wonderful because it's not easy, and yet it's not, she's not, I instantly become your enemy either.
Yes.
She's going, this horrible thing happened, and I'm trying not to blame you, and that's a struggle, right? And so I am, processing it like I don't want you to touch me, but I recognize you need to like that I thought was handled beautifully, but that was very she is an incredibly complex character if you allow her to be. And I thought you did a marvelous job of that. I think the lazy version is, and then she leaves, or the laziest, then he kills her. Like instead, she's around, and that's hard. And that's I found that very touching.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, with that opportunity, look at two people who don't know how to support each other correctly, but deeply, powerfully want to.
Yeah.
That that felt like the right guiding light for their relationship. So
Yeah.
I'm very glad that landed for you.
Oh, it totally worked. So when does this hit? When can folks read?
This this drops on June 17th, so very, very close. It's a
Yes.
perfectly good Pride Month read, given the panoply
Yes.
of queer characters who exist within both Hera and Heracles' cosmos. I can't wait. It felt like it was forever away yesterday, May 31st. Today we're recording on June 1st, and oh my goodness, it feels so much closer.
Yes. Oh, that. Yes. This is the month. It is here. Oh, that's well. Yeah. It's folks are gonna love it. But you still have time to read Someone to Build a Nest in first. So go out, get that one, so that you'll be more excited for Wearing the Lion. Because Someone You Can Build a Nest in. Tell folks a little. I don't want you to spoil it either, but tell folks about the monster because that's what's so brilliant about this book is she is amazing.
Thank you. Yes. So, Someone You Can Build a Nest In is a classic fantasy story told from the point of view of the monster everyone's trying to kill. And she is a do-it-yourself shapeshifter. She's not very good at bones, so she's often collecting things that might work well as bones. Steel chain works great as a spine. Sometimes, though, you really just need somebody else's legs. She's always looking for a good organ donor, and if you work hard enough, anybody's an organ donor. So she is a creature who's constantly putting herself together, and she has been on the outskirts of society her entire existence, constantly hunted by the humanity that she is then hunting in kind. And she views us in a, let's say, not charitable way. To her, civilization is the monster. And she has never trusted us up until the day that she is poisoned and driven off a cliff and thinks she's going to die. And then the most surprising thing of her life happens. She's rescued by a human. This human being, Homily, mistakes Shisheshin, our monster, for a human because she has shapeshifted to look human in that moment. And Homily nurses her back to health and tries to get her medical help. And Shisheshin cannot understand what is happening the entire time because human beings do not behave like this. Human beings try to stab you and poison you and drive you off cliffs. She knows it happened yesterday. What is this human doing? And the more time they spend together, the closer they get, and the more that Shisheshin and Homily find they have in common. But the closer they get and the closer to love they get, the harder it is for Shisheshin to hide the secret, to not correct the misconception. She's got to tell Homily. Maybe Homily will even understand. And just as she's about to confess, homily explains why she's in the region. See, she's hunting this horrible shape-shifting monster, and she hasn't seen it anywhere. It's a hard time for Shisheshin.
Yes. Well, and I will not give away the ending, but I will just say if folks have strong feelings either way about epilogues, you will be very satisfied. I loved that gag. It's like basically, there's a lot of that kind of humor. If you like the kind of humor, listeners, where you go, it's not slapstick, it's, oh, that was clever. There's a lot of that was clever kind of humor that I thoroughly enjoyed. So yes, check that book out. That was a great one. So now, this is one of those hitting the clutch moments and shifting gears very hard, bad transition. But the world is a dumpster fire. And so I wanted to ask you about how you've been coping and how you've been dealing with what is going on, the rise of right-wing fascism in the United States and around the world.
Yes. Have I been coping? Poorly, I'd say probably. I don't know who's doing it particularly well. Yes, anybody who's invested deeply in denial is seeing great returns on investment. And outside of you, outside of those folks, I would say I have been trying to preoccupy myself with the things that I can actually do.
Mhm.
I am not the one who is going to save everybody, but there's never been such a person. And those people who become icons tend to be propped up by thousands and tens of thousands of other people who are willing to be cogs. And I have always been willing to be a cog. Um, if I am good at something, then I am happy to rise up and do it. And if I am good at helping somebody else, then that's where I want to be. I have been helping some people with relocation. I have been helping with some food drives. Um, and I've participated in professional organizations where it's possible. You and I, before the podcast started, talked about a little organization called Authors Against Book Bans.
Yeah, not so little now. Boy, it's gotten big fast. I think it's got 40,000 members now. But
Right.
yes, that's an important way for us to, and it evolved. I don't want to say organically. It was very thoughtful, but it evolved very quickly. This was David Levithan was kind of it was his brainchild, I believe, and it exploded. It moved much faster than they were expecting. But boy, it is sure necessary.
Yes, it does integral work, and the introductory level is signing petitions, and it is never a bad thing to add your name to a good petition. Um, but they show up in person. I live in New York State, and we have had groups go to Albany to speak to lawmakers to try to push back on the more conservative elements or the conservative leans within liberal politicians, as our governor Kathy Hochul is not always the greatest ally. Um, but she can be reasoned with on some things, and so we send people to talk, and we send challenges to book bans across this country in particular. Yesterday there was a pretty pernicious one passed in Texas uh, that is basically seeking to what is the term, filth, that they are going to prevent children from being able to read filth, which of course just means uh, preventing you from being able to access books,
Yeah.
because a children might ever pick up a book, or a child might ever pick up a book and therefore be irreparably harmed, so you must never have it, almost as though the plan was to prevent you from ever having it and not to prevent a child from having it. Well, it's
Yes.
weird how coincidental that
Almost
always
always the
is.
pretext. Yes, we're protecting the kids from
Yeah,
Romeo and Juliet. I mean, and they
right.
acknowledge this would ban Shakespeare. Like this is,
Yes,
when they talk about filth, this is everything but the equivalently filthy parts of the Bible. Those are fine, right? But I mean, everything else this is really dangerous stuff. I wrote a piece for Publishing Professionals Against Book Bans that we're going to be sharing out, and I think it may end up on Authors Against Book Bans as well, about what is it we mean when we talk about book bans, because it sometimes is legislation, but a lot of times it manifests at it's your local school board, or it is just harassment. You can harass someone into silence, and one of the things that is the most pernicious is what we call shadow ban. where the company is just made to be too afraid. Oh, this is written by a queer author, and we're just not going to touch that for a while. Well, that's a ban as well, and there's some of that already starting, where some of the big money is saying, I don't know, this is scary to us. So Authors Against Book Bans is a way for authors to get together and say, are we noticing this is happening? Let's keep an eye out for one another, because
Right.
that's and on Publishing Professionals Against Book Bans side, that's we can see it in those rooms sometimes, and we can be the voice that says, do we notice what we're doing here? We're shadow banning something.
And they are, as an organization, better at observing where the big problems are than an individual can be, and also in proposing solutions and collective action, because collective action doesn't work very well on your own. But it honestly, like, I am not always the best at coming up with a singular answer to something, but in an organization, we can find those. People who are better at generating the ideas can have access to people who have the time and energy, and this work gets done collectively. And so this is a honestly, it is comforting to be discomforted in this group.
Yeah,
Uh, it makes me feel like I am not alone and I have not lost it.
yeah.
Now, that said, I almost tore up this answer because there was a different answer that I wanted to give, and that is that several months ago, a lot of very wise people recommended everybody pick a lane and stick to it. And you could do other stuff, but find a thing that you can do. If you are networked in your community, then find the people who are more food insecure and make sure that they get food. If you have money, great, you can donate. If you're better at fundraising, that's great. If you have an hour a week, some legal organization would absolutely love you to come donate that hour and work with them and be a grunt, be a cog. Trust me, it's not bad. It's actually quite nice to help other people be facilitated into work. But as time passes, you see hundreds of other things. You must be at this protest. You must sign this document. You must write this kind of story. And eventually, our sense of the lane we picked, we get almost dysphoric about it. I should be doing this other thing. I'm wrong. Uh, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to say the way I would recommend people push back the strongest is remember that you are going to commit to one thing and then possibly additional things after it. But remember the lane and stick with it. Keep donating the hour a week or volunteering the hour a week or the 5 hours a week or the $5 out of your paycheck or whatever it is that you have been doing. You can do things on top of it if you actually can. If you can't, all you're going to do is create an imposter syndrome for survival, which
Right.
we do not need right now. And so please give yourself credit and stick with the one thing that hopefully you've been doing all along. And if you have fallen off because you've come to feel insecure, you don't need to beat yourself up. Next week is another week to do that thing again.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just make that pitch.
I think that's
Listeners,
such an
you are
important point. And having a real clear sense of it, when you get overwhelmed, then you know what to retreat to. Like, okay, I started doing too much. What is the thing that I'm not going to lose sight of? I'm still going to do my hour. Especially for organizations that run on volunteers, lots of people show up once and say, I would like to help, and then disappear. And so if you can commit to one thing, that does that organization a lot more good than if you show up one time and say, "Oh yeah, I would like to help," and then never show up again. So yeah, find your path and stick to it. And if you take on more when you have the bandwidth, that's wonderful. But keep an eye on the thing you're not going to lose sight of. That's really important. Also, protect your own health and your own sanity. And so that was one other thing I wanted to ask you about is what has been something that when you are saying, okay, I need to take a deep breath, what has been some movie, game, what has been helping you stay sane right now?
yes. So the thing that I've been dipping into, especially over the last 3 weeks, is Penn and Teller's "Fool Us," which is CW network TV show. Um, Penn and Teller are two very famous magicians and also skeptics.
Yeah.
And what they do is they invite people onto this almost talent show, um, magicians from all over the world. Pardon me for just a second. Sorry about that. Um, Magicians from all over the world: Korea, Japan, Spain, Sweden, Canada, Mexico. And they invite them to do your best trick and see if you can fool two world class magicians. And it is a delight to see the variety of creativity and also this like skeptical spirit that has no ill will whatsoever.
Right.
Everybody involved is so incredibly excited that you might fool them, uh, that they love the challenge. They love to be fooled. They love to not be fooled and figure out how the trick worked. And at the same time, you're seeing an outrageous creativity because there are, you're not going to be surprised, an awful lot of card tricks. And you would think eventually you get quite tired of those. Firstly, a lot of the tricks aren't card tricks. But the other thing is that some of them are just mind bending. How these things are being done. My favorite performer so far is probably Danny De Ortiz, who's a Spanish magician who has the most wonderful magician side manner. He's just chatting with you the whole time and talking about how he doesn't know how this trick is working as he's flipping the entire deck over and the order is changing every time he touches it. And he's like asking you for your card and then getting somebody else's card that they haven't even mentioned yet and giving that to you instead. And destroying your mind with the biggest smile and just absolute humility that's completely fake because this man is a genius who is fooling you the entire time. And sometimes you get great performances like that. Other times you get people who are like, got a strict businessman. I'm very serious this entire time as I make paper airplanes appear from nowhere, that are delightful. So the creativity is great. But what I think the most fun is seeing people have fun with skepticism and have fun with the mechanical engineering of tricks. A couple of times the magician has just like copped to how he did the trick, and watching Penn and Teller lose their minds that they never would have thought anyone would even try to make it work that way is so fun. So it's really just a delight in 10-minute bursts because every trick and disassembling of the trick is about 10 minutes, which fits really well into an incredibly busy schedule.
Right, yeah, yeah. Your schedule, especially right now. Yes, you've got. I know you've got another novel on deadline, and so that's okay. I get to breathe for 10 minutes and see a cool trick, and then back to it. Well, I don't want to. I'm now going to take you away from your writing and put you to work on mine. So I am working on one of those giant epic fantasy novels. And to keep bringing folks back to the show, I decided, okay, so we're going to tell a side quest story, not very creatively titled The Side Quest, that takes place in the same universe, but totally different characters, just so that I can kind of play in the space and explore this universe a little bit. So folks who've been following the show know our protagonist is Zill. She's 11 years old. Her father was, left her in the care of someone else when he was conscripted into the military. And so she decided staying with this other person was very boring. She didn't want to. She ran away from home. So we've got a runaway. She ended up in a market cart stall, kind of escaping with this person, Jesmar, who is, sells goods from location to location. They went to another town. Somebody was nearly being, assaulted in a riot, Banal, because he had a prototype for something that can keep the terrors at bay. And these are these monsters that come out at night. Well, then when they escaped town, somebody else confronted him and said, "You stole something from me." If they didn't have the lantern, which he knew wouldn't work anyway, they would be exposed to the terrors that night. So they all stayed together. And then this other person who we thought might be, villainous or problematic turned out to be helpful and showed them that the other way to keep the terrors at bay was to sing. And so where we left off last time, they sang all night long. Now they let our Zill, our protagonist, sleep, the little girl sleep, but these three adults spent the evening singing, and once she was asleep, bawdy songs, so that they could keep themselves awake and keep the terrors at bay. And now morning has come, Zill's awake, and what happens next?
Obviously, a wave of relief rushes over Zill. The others in the party know that they are safe, but Zill nodded off, not knowing.
Yeah.
Um, and there's an enormous gratitude for Zill. At the same time, there's this creeping curiosity. If the lantern works and the songs work, are those actually the only two things? Our entire existence, we've thought there was one answer to the terrors. If there are two, then are there more than two?
Ah,
Uh, Songs appeal to the nature of sound. The lantern appeals to the nature of sight. Are senses connected to the terrors? And if so, what is it that attracts them and repels them? And
yeah.
so Zill goes to a breakfast with our friends, uh, and asks them. And everybody looks at Zill like madness has broken out over the land. What are you talking about? You can't do that. But of course, they are all exhausted from having spent an entire night of singing, and maybe a little frustrated in arousal because you can only sing so many bawdy songs without any consummation before somebody's like, "Oh boy, where's the town well? I need to dunk my head." Uh, and so they part from breakfast with everybody feeling a little out of sorts and at odds. But also, nobody can get this thought out of their heads. What is the nature of these things? Why do these two things and nothing else seem to work? What has no one ever tried? What has no one ever tried? Will be determined this evening.
Yeah. Well, and Banel and Wellfill are both inventors who've been working on this. And this could be, something where, they're so exhausted at first, they're going, I can't even think about this. And then as they start onto their voyage, they're like, the kid might be onto something. Like, wait a second, we've only looked into before only light sources. Light
Yep.
was the way to keep them at bay. And so even into the architecture of this world, people build their homes with a layer of windows all the way around and a large hearth fire so that all night long there's light coming out of your house and
I love
keep
that.
things can't, get up over. And so everything is designed around keeping a fire going. This, very ancient Greek kind of hearth fire idea, because that's what keeps the terrors at bay. Well,
Yeah.
if music does it, what if something else does it? They've never, and so now maybe you've got Banel and Wellfill, these competing inventors going, oh, maybe there's something we should be exploring in this. So they've got two market carts, and because Wellfill brought their own cart to kind of confront them, and Bale and Wellfill came from the big capital city, and were traveling out to the hinterlands, and Jesmar and Zill were heading back into the interior. And the question is, so first of all, do they all stay together? And where do they go now? And the only thing I think we've teased so far is Jesmar does trade with the other species in this world, including the deep folk. So are they headed off, on Jesmar's route now together? Where are they going to go next?
Can you tell me a little bit about the deep folk? Where do they live?
So there are four species that we know of in this world. There's the stone skins. Those are the most kind of humanoid. There our protagonists are all stone skins. The deep folk are live really deep underground and believe themselves to be all four species believe themselves to be really the only ones that are important in the world, and the others are kind of extraneous. And the deep folk are essentially worm people, and they live in really evolved civilizations, and they manipulate the magic of this world in their own way, and they think they're doing it in the right way, and the Stoneskins do it wrong, right? And they don't understand why anyone would live on the surface, because on the surface there are terrors. So why would you live there, right? So they live in these elaborate cities underground, and they don't trade very much with most Stoneskins because, but there are a few things they have trouble acquiring. They can grow their own food, but it's like phosphorescent lichen, like that kind of.
Nice.
And so there are some, oddities from the surface world that they're into. And then you know, the stone skins are kind of land dwellers. They raise a variation on cattle, a lot of leather, kind of medievally, world. And then we have the station A, who are kind of shrimp, crab, lobster people
Wait.
who are amphibious, and then we have the merfolk, and the merfolk are entirely aquatic and not particularly interested in the stone skins either, because except when there's like naval battles, they want to keep their territorial integrity. So Jesmar, as a stone skin, travels and there we have four. The stone skins have four genders, and Jesmar is a Zaman. So one of the things that I'm exploring is that gender is arbitrary, and so in this particular culture, they have four, and yet there are still people who feel attention. They still don't feel like they necessarily fit the one that they've been assigned. But Jesmar is Zaman, uses they them pronouns, and the Zaman are kind of ace and appear kind of non-binary, but not in the same way as the Timon, who appear like hypersexualized and bi and so Jesmar is this character who's going off to do this trading and now has. I mean, was on their own and now has acquired three people, you know, and has to decide, am I bringing these people along to the deep folk? And there was one of the authors I was talking with said maybe they would think that Zill could be of value in that exchange. Zill kind of proved herself a little bit as somebody who can help out in the market. But now there's these two inventor dudes who've shown up, these two Hammond, the variation of men in for the Stone Skins. So do they all travel together? Did somebody leave? What happens next?
At least one of our inventors has got to be questioning uh, how the deep folk are safe from the terrors.
Mm.
Uh, Underground is notorious for being dark. If there's not that much light down there, then how are the terrors not just running rampage all over that area? There are four different cultures down there, which we've been trading with, but maybe not trading ideas with. Uh, Now, are the terrors terrestrial? Is that why merfolk underwater, who obviously don't have porches, and like, are they all just carrying anglerfish with them everywhere? Probably not. So what is it that is keeping merfolk underwater safe from the terrors? What is it? What is a worm-like being who's probably not carrying a flashlight everywhere? Because worms notoriously don't really need it. Uh, what is keeping them safe from the terrors? These are questions one might never have asked until we came to a head with there being a second way of
Yeah.
repelling the terrors. There must be other ways for those four cultures down below to survive. Is it that the terrors cannot pierce beyond a certain depth? If so, why? And so at least one of our inventors has got to be wondering about latitude, longitude, altitude, darkness, other forms of repellent. I feel like the second one, honestly, has spent all day staring at a perfume bottle, wondering about smell, uh,
Yes. I
and wondering,
because maybe I mean the terrors consume people in their sleep. You'd start to go, maybe they're hunting us by we're meat.
right,
Like maybe. And so I'm loving the idea. We've got these two inventors, one of whom is very focused on kind of the engineering of this lantern. And the
yeah.
other we're discovering might be more of a wildlife biologist. Like he's going, okay, but let's design the whatever the repelling is around learning about these terrors. And
Yes.
what can the deep folk tell us about the terrors? Because he was the one who introduced the idea of singing. So maybe he's going, there are other ways. Hey,
Yeah.
this Zill kid mentioned that if there are two ways, maybe there's a third way. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe I should follow you to meet with the deep folk and see if they are on to some things. Oh,
Huh.
I love that. Okay, so that's a good place for us to stop. They are headed off to meet the deep folk, and we now have a motivation for Wellfill, who's trying to figure out why is it the people underground are not attacked by the terrors. That's an excellent place for us to stop. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to go to our commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you, what you've been daydreaming about lately. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with John Wiswell today. And John, what have you been daydreaming about lately?
So, in my scant moments of freedom, I have been daydreaming about uh, needless animosity between writers of different kinds of stories. Uh, I feel like every week we get another fight between at least two groups of writers on social media. And which two? Oh, who knows? Roll the dice, and whatever numbers come up, those people will be angry at each other. Is it horror writers must all be terrible people, otherwise they wouldn't write about bad things? That's a brilliantly bad take. We can
Right.
we can litigate that pinata. Or what if it's cozy people, cozy writers must just be in denial and they are in service of a status quo? They can't possibly be queer people who are suffering and trying to create some moment of comfort in this harsh life. No, they must just be in denial and they are servants of the worst. That's an equally terrible pinata that we can distract ourselves with. It feels to me every time, whether it's literary fiction versus genre fiction or dark fiction versus light fiction, it's lobster potting because our actual concerns are with political structures in the world that are in some ways getting quite worse. But we know our actions can't solve everything, especially not by the weekend. And so we are looking to accentuate the value of some of our actions, and our art means an enormous amount to us, as well it should. It's why we got into writing in the first place. But because we're insecure about our art, we begin to look at other art and try to undermine it or overreact to attempts to undermine from without, right? Because there's always some literary author who is spouting off about how low fantasy is or commercial fiction is, that mysteries are for smarter people and action stories are for people who are simple, or romance, looking down on romance is a great pastime for terrible people. I'm sorry, you're not terrible, but I do wish you'd stop it.
No,
It's
but I admit I was totally guilty of it. I would go, "Oh, I don't write romance, therefore it's, and I wouldn't say romance writers were bad, but I would say, "Oh, it's not my thing." And then I had to like grow up and go, "But every single story I write has romance in it." And these people know how to write it really well. I need to start reading romance so that the romance in my sci-fi or fantasy or whatever is better because I've got access to experts. They do this really well on a day-to-day basis. Why am I not reading their stuff more, And so that was I mean, I think broadening what you read is part of growing up as a human being too, Like I remember I was dating this woman who said, I told her I write sci-fi fantasy predominantly, and she said, "Oh, I don't read science fiction." And I'm looking at her bookshelf, and it's 1984, Handmaid's Tale, and I was like, but she'd adopted that idea of, oh, if it's good, it's not sci-fi, right? Once it's literary, then it's. And so breaking through those barriers and saying this romance novel can be wonderful literature. I have not been exposed to it before because I had this block, right?
Yeah, and I do think it's okay to try some stuff and say like I just don't care for this, and especially if you're in a rough time in your life, which a lot of us are right now, being like, all right, I'm out. I'm going to go back to the thing that feels like home to me.
Right.
That is totally okay.
Oh, my wife
Uh,
loves like Regency era Britlit, and
mhm.
you just will. I mean, there's a lot to read,
Yes.
and so that's her thing, and she will freely acknowledge it's comfort. Like that
Yes.
is the stuff that is the most. Now, it's not what she reads exclusively, but that is comfort reading, and there's nothing wrong with comfort reading, especially now, folks.
Yes, it to some degree depends upon one's use for literature that informs what you are reaching for. The day I grew up about romance, because I grew up a boy and I didn't think romance was good. There weren't enough fight scenes in it. Obviously, romance was shallow or whatever. Whatever nonsense I believed back then. And the day I grew up was when I befriended an emergency room nurse who, on her days off, would just read entire stacks of paranormal romances, because these things helped her digest and unwind in order to be able to go back and piece people together for a living.
Yeah,
If I were to say, "Oh no, but you should be reading Faulkner," like that'd be quite absurd.
right.
and that's when I started to grow up, was to start realizing there are different uses, and people at different points in their life and of different cultural backgrounds have different use cases for literature. I do think it's generally healthier to have a broader appetite. It is also okay to have a palate. It's less okay to try to litigate the world through a moral sphere, a moral scheme of fiction and fictional taste. But what I think a lot of it really does come from, we are looking for any means of control because we feel so powerless. That is a thing I wish we could communally bond over more. Is then from there talking about, what does this story give me? Why am I reaching for it? Not, you are bad because I assume you must be getting the thing I don't like out of it.
Right. Well, and I'm struck by, I mean, this is a great illustration of the absolute absurdity of the kind of toxic masculinity we were raised in. To say romance is weak and effete, good, to the nurse who is such a badass, they're putting people together every day. Like,
Yeah.
which is I mean, talk about tough. Like, that is an incredibly tough thing to do. And to then go, oh, wait, if this facilitates that, it's a lot more badass than like the escapist fantasy that I'm often reading, which is totally, I'm checking out. I'm going to a different universe because this one sucks. Like, and so, importing our values through our tastes rather than reflecting on what do those tastes tell me about myself. Like I am enjoying this because I need to escape. That doesn't make it good or bad or better, or that's what I need, and that's okay.
Yes, and escapist fiction has many values for those reasons, right? And to some degree, she's using paranormal romances the way you're using epic fantasies. It's funny because then I will sometimes go to a meaty epic fantasy specifically to have some values challenged.
Oh yeah.
Because there are epic fantasies that are about grand themes and are deeply, profoundly political and thoughtful, which some people who claim to hate epic fantasy without reading it don't know. That's another function it can have. There's more than one function to basically any genre, no matter how formulaic that genre appears at first blush.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the deeper and the more you read it, the more you see that. Like, oh,
Yes.
okay, I thought that all epic fantasy was going to have the same moral schema as Tolkien, because Tolkien was all I was exposed to. Oh no, there's a whole gamut of, of ways this can be or can choose not to be commenting on the world in some kind of moral way. Sometimes you come across a piece that is intentionally, Nabokov style amoral, and that's interesting. Like wow, grimdark stuff, where you're going, oh, this is trying not to say anything, and it's almost hard because this world is so challenging. Like, but yeah, I love trying to kind of parse and read between the lines and go, where is this person coming from, politically, as I'm reading a fantasy, oh, apparently they're of this religious tradition, and there's a lot of that here, and I'm starting to, you can make a mystery. Actually, a writing teacher of mine said every good story should be a mystery anyway, and I've really taken that to heart. Like, how can I write a piece and think, what's the mystery here that I want my reader solving within this piece? In every genre. And every genre is going to, not every, but just about every story can tell romance, and so, yeah, these things bleed together a lot more than we're necessarily comfortable with when we're trying to define ourselves in an overly simplistic way. I am this person. No, no, you could be more than that.
Yeah. And the agitation is bubbling up from real places, but it's misplacing the agitation.
Yeah.
I would generally default to having a little bit more empathy, or at least cutting slack for my fellow readers.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to an important question, because you are somebody who supports other authors. Who are some people that you are recommending others read now?
Okay. So I have 3 books sitting right over there that are the books that I am saving for once I finish this draft. I'm on deadline.
Uh,
In addition to having my paperback just come out and a new book coming out this month, my 3rd book is due to the editor pretty soon. And so I'm reading less than I'd like to. I've only read about 20-ish books this year, which to me feels like suffocation. So one book that I've held on to for now a year and a half is Tananarive's The Reformatory, which got every possible award nomination last year. Dew is such a great writer of epic horror, or I don't know if you'd call it the American epic tradition of horror, these large, sprawling stories that dig into the I'll say cultural climate of an area in addition to character. I loved The Good House. I feel like that's almost like that would be I would use that as the blueprint for an American epic horror story. And so I know I'm going to love The Reformatory. The Reformatory's one flaw is it's really long and I have no time. And the
Yes.
thing is, I will not read this 20 pages a night. I am going to read this several hundred pages a sitting, and I'm going to love it.
Yeah.
But so I've been waiting until now, and I probably got about a week and a half before I turn this draft in, and then I am going to read the heck out of The Reformatory. I would recommend Dew in general, though. The second book there is an arc of Isaac Fellman's Notes from a Regicide. So Fellman has only published, I think, 2 books at this point. I am a huge fan of Dead Collections, which is a trans vampire story that breathes so much internal life into the vampire, and is my favorite fictional reflection of fan fiction, because fan fiction obviously reflects fiction. But Dead Collections is about a vampire who, before he was bitten, he was a nerd. And being a vampire, frankly, is not living up to his expectations from AO3 at all. It is really funny, but also achingly poignantly real in its social anxiety, in its searching for its place. And I just think the world of Fellman's work so far. The other one is The Two Doctors Gorski, is a novella that kind of uses golems to look at psychology in a really interesting way. So Notes from a Regicide, I can't wait to read. And I think it's gotten several starred reviews at this point. But really, no matter what anybody said, I was going to pick up Notes from a Regicide. And then last, I feel like the big book of the moment is Caitlin Starling's The Starving Saints, which is just blown up everywhere. And I've really liked Caitlin's other work, like The Luminous Dead. So it sounds like this is a book on the theme of hunger, filtered through various fantasy and horror means. And so I'm very excited to see how upset Caitlin Starling can make me with The Starving Saints. So those are three books that I can't wait to read from writers whose work always kicks ass. So those are my recommendations.
I will tag all of those in the show notes. So, bookshop.org, folks. I encourage you, support your local indie bookstore. Check those 3 out. Those will all be there in the show notes. So, who else do you think I should have on this show?
That's a fine question. So I again bring 3 names with me. I actually mentioned Thomas Ha earlier in this. So Thomas is blowing up huge in the short fiction world, as well he should. He's almost Captain Clark's world at this point. I would say for your audience, I would start with his short story Window Boy, which is a really great reflection on isolation in COVID times, except it's not a COVID story. It's about living on one side of a fake window screen and being curious what's behind the projection and what's really happening outside in the world. But he just every story he writes is a banger. I got to meet him once, and he is a very sweet man. And I think that digging into storytelling mechanics with him would be a really fun podcast.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. Number 2, social media star Premi Muhammad is just a delight. Little known fact, she is actually an exceptionally large bug. But outside of that, a very well behaved bug. Yeah.
A Kafka-esque bug, did you say?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, sure. Kafka-esque, if Kafka were weirder. Premi, absolutely a delight. I adore her work. She's been nominated a lot of places this year for The Butcher in the Forest, which is this fantastic novella she published last year about weird creatures in the forest who super do not want to be your friend. And that novella is fantastic, but so was The Siege of Burning Grass, which was her big, heart-wrenching novel from last year. She's a machine. I don't know how she writes as fast and as well as she does. And she's also just always an absolute delight to talk to. Any podcast would be lucky to talk to Premi. And then lastly is a great Greek author whose debut novel just came out, Natalia Theodoridou, who won the World Fantasy Award for short fiction a few years ago, but his debut novel just dropped. It's called Sour Cherry, which is one of my favorite books I've read this year. It is a retelling of the Bluebeard folktale from all the points of view of women around him. And what it does is it puts his evil into context and almost makes it sympathetic, but also makes him very small and understandable and makes him much smaller than his victims are. And so it does a strange narrative justice around constraining him through understanding him. It's really just a brilliant book. And if you haven't read Theodoridou, his prose is sparkling and brilliant. And this is an entire novel of that. I've been used to only getting it for 5 or 10,000 words at a time. Having an entire book written this well, really just fantastic. And that's called Sour Cherry. So I would recommend Natalia Theodoridou as my third recommendation to have somebody on the pod.
Yes, absolutely. That sounds wonderful. Okay, so before we get to our send-off, I need to thank a few folks. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3 Ds. And thanks to the author Stephen E. Scribner, who's the author of the Taunt Fantasy series but makes music under the name S. Eric Scribner, gave us the song A Poem for the ad break. If you make music and you'd like your song used on the show, I'd love to support your music making as well. Thanks, as always, to Doug, the producer, who makes this show sound good and takes the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipePublishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com. Check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. And if you like this show, rate it and review it wherever you found it. Please check out John's Someone to Build a Nest In and his forthcoming Wearing the Lion, and rate and review. And I should mention, that's how we got connected. It can actually happen. If you rate and review, sometimes the author themselves will go, hey, So rate and review books. It makes a huge difference to authors. Make John's day. When you read the book, you will give it a 5-star review and make John's day. And same for this show. I'm too old to say smash that like button, but if you could gently tap on the like button an odd number of times, I would appreciate that. I have been, asking folks for their kind of advice for our listeners, and I want to make sure you get the last word. So my advice for everybody is, please remember that all writing is political, speaking is political, not writing or speaking is also political, because silence maintains the status quo. So use your voice to make the world a better place. And John, what's your advice for everybody going into their week?
Pursuant from your perfectly good advice is that politics are how society is organized. Don't be estranged from politics because someone has misused them before. Yeah. Societies and politics are inherently social, which is why reading is a political act in addition to writing. Don't just write to be read. Read to connect with the better angels of your society and then your neighbors. Reach out and encourage the writers who give you strength. You will find it returned to you.
Here's our bonus segment, just for supporters of the Patreon. Welcome back, everybody. We're here for our bonus segment, just for the folks who support the Patreon. And so, John, when you're doing, I'm sure you've been doing tons of these interviews. What is something that you wish you would get asked about that nobody ever asks you about?
Got to be kaiju. It's got to be kaiju. If you follow me on social media, giant monsters. Come on. What's better than a monster? A really big one. That's the best thing that could possibly be. The only thing better, an even bigger monster, and kaiju are the biggest.
So where did you get to kaiju first? Like, what got you? Was it Godzilla?
Yeah, probably. I think Godzilla movies were on reruns on like basic TV over the airwaves when I was little and unsupervised. I think that's got to be how it happened. And then like going to the library and seeing that they had something called King Kong, and I was like, well, whatever that is probably rad. And lo, it is. He fights dinosaurs. That's if you're age 7, this is the best movie you've ever seen. He rips the T-Rex's face in half. This is great. Um, so yeah, I definitely entered in through mainstream kaiju, but frankly, I still like them.
Yeah.
And I'd say in recent years, arguably the best Godzilla movies have been made. Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One are genuinely great movies.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
And
uh,
John Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society,
very
great
fun.
book, very funny. Like, yeah, there is an element of the kaiju film, the kaiju world, which somebody pointed out, and it was hilarious to me how long it had taken me to think of this. But like, when you see like Pacific Rim, but this very much is the case also in Godzilla, there was this attitude of how do we fight this thing? Let's make something that's equal size to punch it.
Yes.
And you just have to kind of go, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. That can't possibly
Yes.
be the most practical way to fight it is to make a robot that is the same size, but it does look cool.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Building a big robot is probably the second best thing we could do after making a kaiju, right? So you're just trying to play catch up. I thought Pacific Rim 2 is not a good movie, but it is very funny that then a kaiju just shows up that's too big to build a robot as big as it. That's a very funny idea. Uh, kaiju cinema has a great big tonal range. I like the silly stuff. I guess I'm a weirdo in that I like both the serious stuff and the silly stuff. Because Shin Godzilla is honestly one of my favorite movies.
Is that
It's
Godzilla
the
minus one?
sorry.
Is that Godzilla minus one? The
No, Shin Godzilla
oh, I've
is the
not seen that.
2016 movie.
Oh, okay.
Godzilla minus one is also very good,
But
and a
in a
very
different
conventional.
way.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, that's a heavy film.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and it executes on the formula that Godzilla's been doing in the serious movies for so long, but does it better than it's ever been done by giving a greater depth to the characters while maintaining the thematic resonance, which is often background radiation in kaiju cinema, right? This is the trauma of war and having lost a war, the sense of loss of agency to being occupied, uh, but also your nation having asked you to do things that are fundamentally incompatible with being a life form. That he's the kamikaze pilot that couldn't bring himself to do it. And of course, there had to be somebody like that somewhere. And then what that does to you for the rest of your life. It's beautiful. Um, Shin Godzilla speaks to me more um, because it's the best film about collective action I've ever seen.
See, I've
Um,
not seen this one. So, okay, so
uh,
tell me about the what makes it a film about collective action?
there is barely a main character. There is one who is the guy whose face you'll see the most, but it is about how a government would respond to a kaiju attack. And so there's the failure of the prime minister and the failure of the Japanese diet to respond to the initial appearances of Godzilla. But then there's also the right people in government trying to push to be able to respond correctly upon the second appearance. And then it is about who knows who and who is good at anything. It is not one genius scientist coming up with a bomb. It is not a small plucky band of people who will do the special things. It is dozens of characters who are specialists in theoretical physics and nuclear physics as they're trying to understand what's going on inside of Godzilla. It's people who have connections to France, the United States, and Russia as they're trying to de-escalate our responses to them. Please don't nuke us.
Right.
To prevent this from coming to you, because it is a profoundly political movie. Americans showing up and then Americans leveraging what political will they have to prevent the military from following after them. It is about social organizers trying to evacuate a city that cannot be evacuated in that amount of time, because as anybody who's experienced any horrible natural disaster knows, you cannot just empty a city in an afternoon. It does not physically work. Not a major metropolis.
Yeah.
And
Here,
Tokyo happens to be
you hear
pretty
about
large.
this very, very small town in wasn't Switzerland, Sweden, I believe, recently, where they realized that it was going to be destroyed by a landslide, and they
Yeah,
like airlifted. I mean, it was only 1,800 people or something,
yeah,
but even that is a heroic enterprise to get everyone
Yes.
out of a town very quickly before it is destroyed. And so to then, kaiju style, dial up everything, make it huge. How would you do that? I think it's a really, I'll have to check this out because that's a marvelous way of thinking. Here's a different problem than we've explored with this kind
Yeah.
of, genre.
Yeah, and it's a very different solution than we've explored, which is super compelling because I love collective action. I've written heroes and I'll write them again, but I'm generally much more interested in movements of people and recognizing that there isn't a special one who understands all of the sciences. Intelligence is not a meter that goes up. Uh, and so seeing how many different people you would have to connect, and then that there are specialties in connecting people in the first place, that these two specialists couldn't work together without a liaison or without an organizer to get the room together, to get the space to have them even work in. I love recognizing how many people would have to collaborate for this sort of thing to go well. And it makes sense because we live in an era of increasing natural disasters. And these are all things that require collective action. Singular action and autonomy simply does not answer the challenge that we are facing going forward. So, Shin Godzilla is my favorite of the good Godzilla movies. However, I love bad Godzilla
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
movies so much. I guess the year that Godzilla -1 came out, so did Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, and I love that movie too. Godzilla
Bubblegum.
-1 rules as a good movie, and Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire rules as a bad movie.
Yeah.
I love the weird kaiju veterinarian they have going around on like a bailing hook going down into Kong's mouth to give him dentistry. That stuff's hilarious, and the big fights were really fun. I think the most fun thing about that movie is probably they let the kaiju have the character development. And that I've been waiting for way too long because kaiju tend to get the short end of the stick on character development in
Well,
stories.
they're natural disaster. I mean, if something
That's
is a
right.
natural disaster, it doesn't get, or if it is just, an allegory for war, it doesn't
Yes.
evolve, right? But if you want to make it the character, then and so it is. This is
Yeah.
a great illustration of what we were talking about earlier. All the genres contain all the genres, right?
That's right.
You're gonna, you can use this formula to tell a very different story.
Yeah. Yeah. And even predating kaiju cinema, like the original King Kong technically predates uh, kaiju cinema. King Kong has a lot of personality. It's a deeply problematic movie, but its ultimate political statements about white colonialism are quite apparent and invite Kong to have the personality that he does, rather than the face of terror that Godzilla is in his first movie, and that he is in Godzilla -1. And it can be fun to then pit the face of terror against a more personified creature. So yeah, I enjoy all of these. I can't wait for the next one. Whatever Supernova is. Apparently, Godzilla -1 is getting a direct sequel. Can't wait to see what that is.
Really?
Uh, yeah, the same director, same writer, same visual effects team are all at work on it now, and I can't wait to see because that movie much of it feels complete up until the last 10 minutes, at which they sequel bait the hell out of the movie. No spoilers, but Godzilla -1 is very self-contained and beautiful, and then demands to keep going and stops. I'm so curious how they'll make good on those things, and also what other periods or political themes they'll explore.
Yeah,
Uh,
that I think is the really interesting question is do you go back to, I mean, I shouldn't say the well, speaking out against war is evergreen. Okay, but do you do something very different with it? And so that will be really interesting to see how they handle
yeah,
that.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, giant monsters are just neat. They're gonna be in my books eventually. So far I have avoided kaiju, but it can't last. I will have a big heckin' boy in one of my books eventually.
Oh, yes. Well, well, am looking forward to that. But first, folks, please check out Someone to Build a Nest in and Wearing the Lion. So good. You will thank me later. Thank you, John, for being on the show. This has been a blast.
Thank you for having me, Benjamin. This has been the last.
If I my time.